This series presents information based in part upon theory and conjecture of the system of esoteric symbolism. The purpose is to suggest some possible interpretation, but not necessarily the only one, to the many mysteries we will explore. Welcome to Unlocking the Dream Vision. I'm your host, author R.J. von-Bruening. In this video series, we will be exploring the mysterious dream vision of Enoch, as explored in my book, Unlocking the Dream Vision, The Secret History of Creation. In this video, we will be exploring the sons of Noah and the coming of the Son of Man. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to hit the like button below and subscribe for future videos. The next part of the story within the dream vision is similar to the biblical account that speaks of the generations of the sons of Noah. But unlike the Noah story in the Bible, the dream vision is rather vague concerning these three bowls. Because of this, the book of Genesis provides most of the information for this part of the journey. As we've already touched upon, the three sons of Noah spread out upon the face of the earth and began to multiply. It's hard to not believe that they would not have naturally wanted to reoccupy the old areas like ancient Egypt and Greece. But as the populations grew, there would have been new groups created, and that they would have needed to move into new lands and create new kingdoms and nations. Within the dream vision, all of this is represented symbolically by the creation of new beasts of the field and birds of the heaven. This is the point within the dream vision where we begin to fully see how the mystical animal symbolism represents people or different groups of people, many of which are the kingdoms and nations spoken of within the biblical story. And they began to bring forth beasts of the field and birds, so that they arose many different genera of lions, tigers, wolves, dogs, hyenas, wild boars, foxes, squirrels, swine, falcons, vultures, kites, eagles, and ravens, and among them born a white bull. Book of Enoch, chapter 89, verse 10. This verse is rather vague of these other animals. This is where we need to return to the Bible for guidance. By doing this, we will find that in verse 8 and 9 of chapter 10 of Genesis, we're told of Ham and his firstborn son known as Cush, who begets Nimrod. He began to be a mighty one in the earth, and he was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Therefore it was said, even as Nimrod the mighty hunter before the Lord. This is an important, if not often overlooked, reference of a great hunter figure within the Bible. This is also the next important example of how all the ancient mythologies, legends, folklore, and traditions of the world are actually connected to one another through the mystical symbolism. It is also an example of how these other traditions help provide important additional details to the overall story that are missing from the biblical or the dream vision itself. The hunter figure that the Bible remembers as Nimrod is also remembered in numerous other ancient mythologies, legends, and folklore. This mighty legendary hunter of ages past is still even remembered to this day and immortalized in the constellation of Orion, the hunter. Although this mighty hunter figure is remembered by countless traditions, the truth is we know next to nothing about this individual. We don't know what his name was, who he was, or when or where he might have actually lived. It's even possible that this legendary hunter of old is not even a single person, but the product of numerous different stories of different great hunters that slowly over time became rolled up and mixed into one story of one hunter that stood before the gods. With so many unknowns about this legendary hunter figure, modern scholars have typically viewed him as nothing more than a purely mythical or legendary figure. This could well be true, but there's also no denying that whoever this individual actually was, if he existed, he had a tremendous impact on the people around him and the culture he lived in. It was an impact so great that it left a deep scar within human society that reaches from that deep, dark, mystical time of legend and myth into our own modern day. Within the biblical account of this mighty hunter known as Nimrod, we are told that he creates a kingdom in an unknown land of Shinar, where he built 4 cities at the beginning of his rule, with one of these cities being named Babel. This then leads us to one of the most famous biblical stories of all time, the mysterious Tower of Babel and the confusions of the tongues of humanity. The great confusion of the tongues has traditionally been presented as punishment for the pride that humans had in trying to build a tower whose top may reach upon to heaven. There have been countless different interpretations of this story over the centuries, with many believing this story is just a mythical explanation for the reasons of why humanity speaks so many different languages. In order to understand this part of the story, we need to take a closer look at the biblical text and where this tower may have been built. The reason this is important is because we are told in chapter 10 of Genesis the kingdom of Nimrod and the 4 cities that he built were located again in this mysterious land of Shinar. This has traditionally been interpreted that the city of Babel and its legendary tower was the first city built after the Great Flood. However, this does not explain why the languages of the other 2 sons of Noah would have been confused, or if they were ever confused in the first place. The secret to understanding this part of Genesis is understanding that these events are related to the line of Ham, which is, according to the story and the esoteric interpretation, the line of Cain, or the black bowls of the first men that fell from grace when the Watchers came to earth. As we have learned, the descendants of the line of Cain naturally would have had the strongest loyalty to the great Lord of Light and the fallen Watchers. We also touched upon that it would be necessary for the Lord God to suppress this loyalty to the Lord of Light. Again, this is one of the reasons for the building of the 2 additional pyramids on the Giza Plateau, as we examined in the last video, with the political statement that they clearly made to all the people who worked on them, lived by them, or would see them. Once you're aware of the greater overall story that is revealed by the mystical symbolism in the dream vision, and with the additional information it provides to the biblical story, we can for the first time begin to understand that this story of the building of a tower in the city of Babel, and then its following punishment and confusion of the tongues that followed, are in fact related to this ongoing punishment and oppression of the line of Cain, which is now represented by this line of Ham in the story. It also allows us to understand that an actual tower, if it had been built, it would have been for the purpose of trying to reestablish contact with the great Lord of Light, which have been something that the new rulers would not have looked kindly upon. It also allows us to realize that the confusion of the tongues would have been done in order to make it difficult as possible for the followers of the fallen Watchers to be able to communicate with their masters. It would have the additional benefit of making it difficult for the fallen Watchers to be able to reorganize their human followers into a much more cohesive group as they had done before. At this moment, this idea of the tower being used to establish contact with the great Lord of Light and the confusion of the tongues might seem a bit confusing and maybe even a little bit out of place. But once again, this is one of those pieces of the story that we will examine in greater detail at a later point in the story. At this moment, we need only focus and remember the general idea of the tower being built to reach the gods. After the destruction of this legendary tower and the confusion of the tongues, the book of Genesis then focuses on the generations of Shem, which eventually leads to the birth of Aram, or better known as Abraham, the father of the 3 great monotheistic religions of the world. This is the white bull that was born among the other animals that we just saw in the last verse of the dream vision. This connection to Abraham in the Bible will become clear in the next set of verses of the dream vision. And they begun to bite one another. But that white bull which was born amongst them begat a wild ass and a white bull with it. And the wild asses multiplied. But that bull which was born from him begat a black wild boar and a white sheep. And the former begat many boars, but that sheep begat 12 sheep. And when those 12 sheep had grown, they gave up one of them to the asses. And those asses again gave up that sheep to the wolves. And that sheep grew up among the wolves. And the Lord brought the 11 sheep to live with it, and to pasture with it among the wolves. And they multiplied and became many flocks of sheep. Book of Enoch, chapter 89, verses 11 through 14. As with the Adam and Eve story we saw earlier, these verses are clearly related to the story of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Jacob's 12 sons that later become the basis of the 12 tribes of the nation of Israel. This is the next example of how the mystical animal symbolism of the dream vision represents people. It also allows us to begin identifying a few of the people that this mystical animal symbolism represents. In this case, the first white bull is Abraham. The wild ass is his first son, Ishmael, whose descendants become known as the Ishmaelites, or also known as the Mennonites, or possibly even merged with them. The second white bull is, of course, Isaac, with the black wild boar being his oldest son, Esau, to be the founder of the nation of Edom. The white sheep is Jacob, father of the house of Israel. The 12 sheep are the 12 sons of Jacob, which, according to the Bible, are the beginning of the 12 tribes of Israel. The sheep that is given up by the asses to the other 11 sheep is the one remembered of Joseph, with the wolves being the ancient Egyptians. Before we can take a closer look at the individuals in this part of the story, we must first explore the first part of the passage, that they began to bite one another. As we've been learning, this is how the symbolic dream vision describes war. Returning to the biblical text, we find that this must be referring to the War of the Kings in chapter 14 of Genesis, whereby Lot, nephew of Abraham, is captured and then rescued by Abraham. This war of the gods eventually results in the famous destruction of the sinful cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. Ever since July 16, 1945, and the detonation of the first atomic weapon at the test range of White Sands, New Mexico, it has been proposed many times that the destruction given in the Bible of the great wicked cities of Sodom and Gomorrah are eerily similar to the effects of a nuclear explosion. But as we all know, this idea is flat rejected by modern science, with any researcher who proposes this idea having their careers quickly ended. Although a nuclear event is out of the question for modern scientists, it has still left them with quite the problem, because anybody can go and read this story, with it being next to impossible to deny that it sounds like it's describing a nuclear explosion. In order to get around this problem, it has been proposed over the last few decades by the scientific community that it must have been an impact event of a small asteroid or comet that could explain this ancient story. In order to get around this problem, it has been proposed over the last few decades by the scientific community that it may have been an impact event that could explain the ancient story. But the truth is that the impact theory for the destruction of the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, at least at the moment, is lacking any real evidence to support it. We will now begin to learn of this destruction of the wicked cities of the plains is so important. This is also our next step towards leaving the world of myth, legend, and faith, and where we begin entering into the realm of science, history, and possibility. It is also the point where we will begin answering many of the mysteries while also filling in some of the blanks that we've already raised in the earlier videos. Additionally, we'll also begin answering several other mysteries about the secret history of creation that you may not be aware of at this point in time. In order to understand this, we must first understand that if the destruction of the sinful cities of Sodom and Gomorrah was a nuclear event, then this nuclear event would have left behind unique and specific evidence that would still be detectable to this day. This evidence takes the form of unique radioactive isotopes and their decay products that can only be created either in a nuclear explosion or a supernova event. These unique radioactive isotopes, along with their decay products, are easily detectable for tens of thousands of years, with a few of them being detected for hundreds of thousands of years, and even a couple being detectable for millions of years. What this simply means is that if it was a nuclear event that destroyed the evil cities of the plains, then it would have left behind this type of unique and specific radioactive evidence behind, and it would still be detectable to this day. It would in fact be the smoking gun that everybody has been looking for and demanding. Now this is where it starts to get interesting, because The truth is, this unique and very specific radioactive evidence of the use of nuclear or nuclear-like weaponry in the ancient past has already been found. Not only has this evidence been found, but it allows us to begin dating these events. It will also allow us to begin seeing the greater secret history of creation that has been hidden within the mystical symbolism. It will also begin to show you how the secret history of creation has been hidden, but also presented to you at the same time, all through your life. This evidence of an ancient nuclear event was first discovered by nuclear scientist Richard Feinstein of the U.S. Department of Energy's Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, more popularly known as Berkeley Lab, and Arizona geologist Alan West when they were studying Icelandic marine sediment samples and ice cores. What they discovered that there was 3 distinct and separate layers that contain numerous radioactive isotopes that can only be created in a powerful nuclear event. These 3 layers had been dated roughly to 39,000 BC, 32,000 BC, and around 10,800 BC. Within each of these layers, several unique radioactive isotopes and their decay products were discovered. They also found a number of highly magnetized particles. Analyzing these magnetic particles at the laboratories in Hungary and Canada revealed that they were rich in titanium, iron, magnesium, thallium, potassium, and other rare earth elements, thorium, and even containing bits of uranium. This unique composition of the elements is very similar to lunar rocks known as KREP, or K-R-E-E-P, found by Apollo astronauts, which is the acronym for the different elements, with K being the atomic symbol for potassium, REE represents rare earth elements, and P is for phosphorus. These KREP rocks were not only discovered by Apollo astronauts, but they've also been found in lunar meteorites that fell to Earth in many areas of the Middle East at an estimated 10,000 to 12,000 years ago. This is the smoking gun evidence everyone has been looking for and demanding. It is also undeniable proof that nuclear weapons were used in the ancient past. Since it is currently impossible for any working scientist to endorse such an idea, Mr. Firestone and Mr. West have proposed that this evidence was created by a supernova event. In 2005, at the Second International Conference on the World of Elephants in Hot Springs, South Dakota, they proposed that this evidence supported the theory that a supernova explosion around 42,000 years ago, with the explosion's initial shockwave hitting Earth at about 34,000 years ago. To support this, in addition to the evidence they had found in the ice cores, they presented several mammoth tusks that dated from the same time period that were peppered with tiny impact craters. These tiny impact craters are thought to have been produced by the small iron-rich grains that must have been traveling at an estimated 10,000 kilometers per second. They argued that these grains may have been emitted and accelerated by the supernova that exploded roughly 6,000 to 7,000 years earlier at about 250 light years from Earth. They then proposed that this supernova event was followed by a 10-kilometer wide or 6-mile wide comet that was composed from the remnants of this supernova explosion that hit somewhere over North American landmass about 13,000 years ago. The latest research supports that this impact event took place at approximately 10,775 BC, give or take 50 years. Additionally, they presented the findings from a Mr. Al Smith of the Berkeley Lab, who used the lab's low background counting equipment to detect the radioactive isotope potassium-40 in several Clovis arrowhead fragments that date from approximately the same time. Researchers in Canada found that the Clovis layer sediment samples are significantly enriched with this isotope, with the potassium-40 in the Clovis level being at a much more abundant level than is naturally found within the solar system. This isotope is only formed within supernovas or nuclear explosions. It is also found in abundant levels in the other two older layers. Using this information, the scientists contend that these three radioactive peaks are 150%, 175%, and 40% above modern levels, respectively, and could only have been caused by a cosmic ray producing event, such as a supernova. This is all very intriguing and a highly interesting theory that at first appears to fit the available evidence. The only problem is that this theory has several fatal flaws that easily proves that it's incorrect. The first fatal flaw, and possibly the most damaging, is the fact that there is absolutely no other astronomical evidence that supports a supernova event occurred within 250 light years of Earth in the last 5 million years. The next fatal flaw is that there is no other evidence from any other source that supports a supernova shockwave hitting the Earth or any other body in the solar system 34,000 years ago. The final fatal flaw is the idea of a 10-kilometer wide comet fragment from the supernova traveling 250 light years to impact somewhere in North America is not supported by any evidence. In fact, the idea is rather outrageous once you think about it for a moment. If you run the numbers, you will realize that this 10-kilometer wide fragment would have had to have been moving at approximately 10% the speed of light in order to cover the distance and the amount of time given. Also, this fragment is supposed to be roughly the same size as the asteroid that is believed to kill off the dinosaurs 65 million years ago, which left a 110-mile wide crater in its wake. Which again, there is no supporting evidence of this type of event happening 13,000 years ago. So as you can easily understand now, this entire supernova theory is easily disproven and without much effort at all. This leaves us with the only possible solution, that this is evidence of nuclear weapons being used in the ancient past over a much larger area than anyone has ever imagined before, which by default means that we are dealing with a technologically advanced civilization in the ancient past that was able to produce and use these weapons. Apparently, not only against each other, but also our ancient ancestors. Our ancestors are then symbolically recorded this in their stories, thus preserving them in religious texts and the mythologies we still have today. Our starting point to understanding how this all fits together into the secret history of creation begins with the first radioactive spike from 39,000 BC. We will take a closer look at each of the other two radioactive spikes as we journey deeper into the symbolic dream vision. If we can accept this evidence at face value that the first radioactive spike of 39,000 BC is evidence of the nuclear destruction of the cities of the plains remembered in the Bible as Sodom and Gomorrah. This then allows us to begin understanding the next part of the story of the creation of the sheep in a way never thought possible. By using this 39,000 BC date as the time of destruction of the cities of the plains, we can begin to realize that this is roughly the same time that Homo sapiens, or Cro-Magnon Man, our immediate ancestor, begins entering into the fossil record, which, as we will learn through the mystical symbolism, is related to the biblical story of Abraham, Isaac, and his sons Esau and Jacob. We'll also learn that this story in the book of Genesis is speaking of the creation of the first Cro-Magnon Man. This radical idea might seem rather confusing at the moment, but if we return to the story of the patriarchs in Genesis with this idea in mind, the confusion will soon begin to disappear. Within the Genesis story, we are told that Abraham was born and raised in the city of Ur in the land of Mesopotamia. We are then told that he was called by the Lord God, who instructed him to leave his father's house and go to the land of Canaan. We need to pause for a moment and take a closer look at the ancient city of Ur before moving on. This is where we will begin entering into the historical record. It will also provide us with a small insight on how the gods had organized human society to best serve their needs. The ancient city of Ur is rather typical of the many city-states that made up ancient Mesopotamian civilization. It is also known that religion lay at the very center of Mesopotamian life. especially within the walls of the city-states like Ur. Every human activity, be it political, military, social, legal, literary, or artistic, was normally overridingly controlled by the religious purpose behind it. It was their primary frame of reference for understanding the natural society and themselves, with it dominating and inspiring on all their cultural expressions. The Mesopotamians believed that they were created and given life so they could carry out the will of the gods on earth. Each of these different city-states are said to have been ruled by one particular god, with each city being built around that god's temple. In the case of ancient Mesopotamia, these religious temples typically took the form of a ziggurat. These are also known as the high places that are spoken of throughout the Bible. The numerous wars between the different city-states were always interpreted by the ancient Mesopotamians as conflicts between the gods of those respective cities, with victory ultimately depending upon divine favor or intervention and not upon human effort. The Mesopotamians believed their cities to be sacred communities dedicated to serving the divine masters, with the hope of appeasing their gods that would bring security and prosperity to them and their cities. This activity was supervised by the priests, with the temple being the heart of the city's life. The temple owned or controlled almost all the land in the city. Temple priests collected rents, operated businesses, and received and contributed the taxes for festivals and upkeep of the temple. Almost all of the city's inhabitants worked for the temple or the priests as tenant farmers, agricultural laborers, or servants. The priests also coordinated the city's economic activity. They supervised the distribution of land, oversaw the many works of irrigation, and the storing of food for emergencies. The temple scribes kept meticulous records of the expenditures and receipts of the overall economic activity, and all of this was done to serve and to curry favor with the god of the city. No important decisions were made by kings or the priests or even the common people without first consulting the god of the city. History tells us that each ancient city-state normally had one supreme god with the focus of that entire city to serve the needs and wants of that god. This implies that the slave society from before had been fully reestablished by this time. It also gives us an insight that these gods routinely disagreed with one another and went to war through their human followers. This also appears to be showing us that these gods had become incredibly dependent upon our ancient ancestors' labor and service. Additionally, as we are now aware, there were at least 3 primary factions of these gods, and we can now realize that it is possible that each of these city gods may have been loyal to one or more of these political primary factions. This dependency of our ancient ancestors' labor appears to have grown so great that Neanderthal was unable to provide this function effectively, which in turn made it necessary for the gods to create a new man, Cro-Magnon Man. As we will see, the creation of this new man is recorded in the Bible as the story of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and his brother Esau. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button below, and don't forget to subscribe for future videos.